Okay, this is my last one for this unit. And this one is basically over the period right after the war, the early 20th century. And so the major things, well, we'll start with the Russian Revolution. So at the end of the war, there was a lot of unrest. Well, actually, there had been a lot of unrest in Tsarist Russia. Okay, the last Tsar was Nikolai, and he served from 1868 to 1918. And I had mentioned the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, and then World War One. Both of those created a lot of stress in Russia. Russia lost the first one. Actually, the World War One, they just withdrew. Okay, um, but they basically had, and you'll read about them, but they had some unrest and revolts. They ended up creating a representative assembly that they called the Duma, and they tried to get more of a what do I want to say, a democracy, right? A representative government. But it became obvious that this was the czar really wasn't willing to give up much of his power. Okay. Um, so it was kind of fragile. The balance of power was, not super steady, I guess is the word for it, right? And so things just kept, the German army is pressing toward Russia. Things are not going well in the war. And there were a group of people, of Russian communists. They were called the Bolsheviks. They were led by Lenin. And they basically saw this as an opportunity to have a revolution. So if you've read Karl Marxism, the Communist Manifesto, you'll remember that what he talked about was basically workers, industrial workers, rising up. The proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and basically the bourgeoisie have to step down, the proletariat rises up, everybody becomes equal, right? Okay, so that's what Marx encountered, but that was not, or that's what he envisioned, but that is not the situation in Russia. It was a except for a little bit in the big cities like Moscow and I was going to say Stalingrad and St. Petersburg. There it was pretty much agricultural. Most of the population were serfs, and this is not, not exactly what Marx thought about. But Lenin, he said, yeah, we can do this. We create what he called a vanguard party, and this group of revolutionaries who would lead both the workers and the peasants. We're going to combine them all into one big, and we're going to make this happen, basically. And so that was his vision. Um, you could read about all the details, but ultimately we know, right, that they declared that that there was a revolution, basically. Okay, I don't know why I'm having trouble saying this, right? But anyway, so they consolidated their power in a couple of places. They signed a treaty with Germany, basically pulling out of the war, giving Germany a bunch of land that they had to end up giving back because they lost the war. But they declared themselves the new government. That wasn't quite all. If you remember the French Revolution, yeah, it never happens quite that easily, right? So now there was a counter revolution. So we had the Red Army, the Bolsheviks, against the White Army. Okay. And so that lasted for a couple of years, I think. And then a lot of people died. I think your book said 10 million almost. There were mostly civilians, and the war lasted for about 4 years. But at the end, the Bolsheviks prevailed. Okay, so and that essentially created the Soviet Union, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, which became really important during the Cold War, and we'll be talking about them a lot. Okay, but essentially what it was is that they replaced the old order monarchy and nobility. They finally got rid of them. They replaced them with a communist regime. Lenin was the first leader, and he led very differently than his successor. But he was the first leader. Okay, so this period is also what in your book spends some time talking about this modernism in the arts. So you've got art and literature and music and poetry and all this stuff. And really what this is reflective on, why they spend so much time talking about it, is because it's really reflective of kind of the chaos that societies and people and the world is going through right now, right, with all this stuff. And so you've got Impressionism, Vincent van Gogh, Edvard Munch, people like that. But you've also got the Klimt, Picasso, all of those, the modern art, really, very different, but also music, architecture, literature. You've got the people like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Hemingway, a whole bunch of a lot. There was really a lot going on, right? The rise of jazz, Virginia Woolf, Marcel Proust, Kafka, James Joyce, just a lot of things that probably are familiar to many of you. But what they are they're very different. They're big departures from what were before the war, right? And also in fashion. I mean, this is the age of the flappers, and women are cutting their hair short and wearing shorter skirts, and just get rid of that old Victorian stuff. We're here doing new things. We also had people like Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and they're kind of making strides in the fields of mental health, different kinds of psychiatry, psychology, different than just the medicine of the body, of the physical body. Women's roles, gender roles, as I mentioned before, in some places they got the vote. There were many women who were unwilling or not happy about having to go home after they worked, during the war, and had a much greater level of freedom. And in some cases, they didn't have to go back because there were so many men that were gone. But, they wanted to go to universities, they wanted medical schools, law school, become scientists, that sort of thing. So, they're making strides. And, by 1920, many women, like women here in the United States, had gotten the vote. So lots of things are happening. All of this kind of came to a grinding halt with the Great Depression. And the war was one of the causes of the Great Depression, but also we know a lot more about what happened here in the United States, where there was a stock market crash. People are, going crazy on the stock market, and then all of a sudden it crashes, right? But it was a worldwide event. And so it happened in Europe as well. And every government kind of tried a different approach to how to handle it. But one of the big things that happened in Europe was that the Treaty of Versailles said that Germany had to pay for the war. And so they had these massive reparations payments that they were supposed to make. Well, Germany didn't have the money, and inflation, so what they did, they started just printing money, and then they had massive inflation, right? And then eventually they just stopped paying. But the economies of Europe were every bit as much affected as the economies in the United States. So anyway, that's the beginning of the 20th century. We'll delve into that a little further. We'll look at what's happening politically after, in this period, or in the period between the wars, and what led to the Second World War and the Holocaust in the next unit.